Yeah, the fate of large corporations is to die, right? There's enough data to tell you that. So I'm sorry if you work for a large company. I worked for a very large company long time. The same company decided that Meta was everything and like nobody talks about Meta anymore, right? So there are various examples. One story sort of comes to my mind. There was a course I was doing at a leading business school based out of Boston anyway. So there, this one of the participants, and we were talking about this, this whole sort of why do companies die, why don't they see innovation? And there was a classic example that somebody gave me. He used to work for a German manufacturer, engineering manufacturer, and he went to China. And so he reported back and said, these engineering tools that we produce, which get fitted into our machines, nobody's buying these spares and accessories because you make money out of spares and accessories, not the main sort of machines. And he said, the local Chinese manufacturers are manufacturing it. So the response of this German engineering firm was, okay, if that's the case, let's actually make it better. Let's engineer it so you can't fit in a smaller part, like let's improve it by X microns, right? The tolerance, reduce the tolerance to such an extent, right? Make it even better that those parts cannot be fitted in. Okay, this guy said, okay, that worked for a while, obviously. 2 years later, the sales just went down because the manufacturers locally started producing machines. They're saying, okay, if I can't fit my part into it, I'll actually produce a machine and make it 30% cheaper, right? So the way, disruptors will respond to this is going to be very, very different. So to your point, I think, unless you create separate mechanics, you measure it differently, you have them report into the highest level, there is focus on it, and one of the leading tech companies has shown how to do it. But is it sustainable? I have no idea, right? Frankly, right now it looks like it's sustainable, but who knows? And they were dying, right? That company was dying. He's revived the company. He's done exceedingly well. I think they've done very well, made the right sort of calls, investments, been very agile. But who knows over the next 50 years what's going to happen, right? But my view is fate of large companies, once you become very large, like you're going to die. So I think break it up, break it into baby bells. They will all do very well, right? Like do it on your own before the government comes in and does it for you.
And from a completely different perspective, whether it's inside out or outside in, if people cannot understand innovation, because I see 20,000 definitions of innovation like strategy,
right.
I'm eternally confused as to what is the right one. So I can give you this example of an organization that I worked with where we said we'll, kind of introduce a recognition for somebody who innovates. And one person walked up and said, Meena, I don't even know what innovation is. Right. So we went to the drawing board to teach them the framework of thinking, the framework of a difference between a suggestion and an innovation, and then took it forward. So I think as much as all of this is relevant, preparing the organization from a people perspective is becoming crucial and will be crucial in times to come, with AI, without AI.
So I'll just take a moment to kind of summarize whatever we've mentioned up and then build the next question on it. We started off with creating a psychological space, psychological safety that we use, the academic terms of psychological safety, where you have the culture where the employees can take the risks on their own and they would not be reprimanded or punished for or bringing in their own brains into the innovation part and failing. So they should not be fearing about the failing part or they being punished for failing. So that psychological safety, we build it. We started off the discussion with the culture there. So, and then the size of the organization, the smaller ones, more agile, the larger ones, there is so much of inertia that might creep into because of the levels of hierarchy. And then we moved the discussion to organizations investing in innovations in terms of Google, to add on to that interesting fun fact that you shared, Google initially had a rule of psychological safety in terms of 80-20 rule, the famous 80-20 rule. The 80%, all the employees should have to do the projects that are shared and agreed upon. 20% of the time, they can use the Google's resources to invest in their own personal projects and drive into innovation. And they felt that that is not enough, and then they opened the Google X as an entire venture organization to experiment. And they are and this was once I was discussing in the classroom, and they were really brilliant ideas. It's just a platform to think out of box. I mean, they were talking about balloons, helium balloons in space, and they would act as satellites. Imagine, and internet connectivity would be fastened up. Okay, so this is something they were doing it in a as an entire organizational culture, or and as an entire value system, and the key things as Google X. Now that is another level of bringing in experimentation into the organization. Okay, and then we discussed about the importance of understanding socio-economic factors too, cultural, intergenerational factors that come into in terms of Gen Z, Gen X, the work values, the relationship with work, and the socio-economic situations, be it Mr. Trump, and all the things that needs to be understood. And then the outside perspective of understanding the market needs or creating that demand for the consumers, or seeing it way ahead of the curve, as in Facebook looking far ahead in terms of Instagram, buying Instagram, or WhatsApp for that matter being bought. This is really interesting. But to start it off small, what other workplace rituals within the company that we have to look for, or that you within your own companies experimented to ensure that there is innovation in place, so that the employees or the departments are not afraid to experiment or take risks, because that eventually becomes the bottleneck, and that also defines whether the company is going to be a fast follower or a first mover. So what are the other rituals within the companies that would actually signal whether it's going to be a fast mover or a first mover or a fast follower?
I think it starts with the leadership, right? And we know that leaders sort of transform companies. I think it starts with leadership being absolutely honest about what they're doing, right? So if as a leader you are ready to accept the mistakes that you're making, I think you've given a free pass to everyone, right? So one of the rituals in a team setting is this, right? That go out and accept what you think you thought was right, but you did it wrong. The culture of doing pilots, right? Like small things, so that it's not like, especially if you're a large company, you're worried about the optics, dynamics of various things, right? So don't go out there building a big plan. Like start small, experiment, agree on a set of metrics, learn. Again, sort of keep shifting it as you sort of go along. Yeah, those are the things that sort of come to my mind besides what you've already mentioned. Yeah.
So I think in this company that I spoke about, where we trained people to think first even before getting them to innovate, we said everybody who has attempted to be part of this program will be recognized. And we found year one was a meager 2% who said they will, and they didn't know it was a suggestion, an idea. And we got a person who works in innovation, basically from Wipro, to kind of come and tell us what is a suggestion, what is an innovation, and started from the grass tacks. And we discovered, by the time, this was a program for emerging leaders, our mid-level managers, who were primarily the largest base within the organization. And we found by year 3, we had 3 ideas that brought in 20% of revenue for us. Very slow start, but we reached there. So I think it's also about understanding that innovation is a very hazy space in most people's minds, at least in our country. Some schools teach us, some schools just allow us to by heart and deliver.
So one of the ritual or the telltale sign for me, you go to a small conference room, you look at the whiteboard. If the whiteboard is clean, I know the company is a fast follower. If the whiteboard is messy, has not been cleaned, has been scribbled upon, you can sense that this is a company which is in a hurry. And I've seen this across countries. Just by looking at the whiteboard, you can tell whether the company is a fast follower or whether the company is a early mover. It's so in your face. You don't need to, look for anything else.
I think I think it was, you always ask, what are the problems you are solving currently? And are we solving the harder problems, right? And there could be many ways to solve the harder problem. And in that, which is the test and scale, you do pilots. The pilots have the same governance or as rigor as the main business. We decide and agree on the metric, and we are pretty emotionless about it. It doesn't work out, throw it away, move on to solving. The questions don't go away. The harder problems remain. You try a different route, right? So if your regular review mechanism doesn't have the pilots in it, or you're not having enough conversation about the tough problems that needs to be solved. So one of the frameworks that we use, I think it's a common framework, is 1 year down the line, what will you stop doing? What new things will you do? And what are you going to intensify? If this is not the part of your conversation of leading a daily business life, then there is some problem.
So I come from a different background. I spent a good amount of time at startups over the last 12 years. So when we are entering a space, and I primarily worked in fintech, we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing differently? And who should lead that charge within the team? So essentially, it all starts from the employees that we are hiring. So we are not necessarily kind of like underwriting traditional businesses to whom banks could go and give loans. Or even if banks could go and give loans, we don't have the luxury of taking 30 days to make decisions. So when we hire people also, right from the people stage, we are like, here is the problem statement, think outside of the box and come up with a solution. Now, if he or she more or less shares that, hey, this is how it is done, and when we, after we nudge them, they're like, no, that is wrong, then we don't necessarily go and bring those people in our company. Those are good employees for traditional banks and NBFCs. So first is the people you have to bring in who can actually think outside the box, or at least after a little bit of nudge, can think beyond whatever they have done. So that is first part. Now second thing is, if we are going to do the same process, whichever the traditional players are doing, then you don't necessarily have an edge, because the traditional players always have the capital, the brand,